where it's estimated that around 20,000 Muslim women and girls were raped by the Serbian soldiers. So the number of victims is still very politicized and vary between 300,000 and 3 million people. It estimates between 200,000 and 400,000 women and girls were raped under a systematic campaign of genocide based on Islamic laws and Muslim leaders that declared them spoils of war or war booty. This results in numerous deaths, suicides, abortions, and births of war babies. The Bangladesh politician Sheikh Haman invented the term Birangona, which means war heroes, in a failed attempt to save those women and girls for being outcasts of their society. But on the contrary, Birangona women and girls became a stigma. They were often rejected by their own society and their own families. Nowadays, there is a movement of activists to upgrade the status of Birangonas to freedom fighters. The guerrilla resistance movement formed by the Bangladesh military, paramilitary, and civilians that fight against the oppressors in order for the Birangona to be respected among their community. Nonetheless, by December 2020, only a total of 400 Birangona were declared freedom fighters. None of the government attempts to provide support and aid for the recovery of those women were sufficient. So the government of Bangladesh set up rehabilitation centers for the Birangonas who undertook abortion, put their own children for international adoption, arranged the marriage, trained them in vocation skills, and offered insurance for the government jobs. However, all these measures were not effective in helping the survivors overcome social rejection. They resist the genocide itself. From now on, Layla will address the legal aspects of the topic.
Good morning. I'm continuing the presentation. The state of Bangladesh decreed a way to hold criminals accountable, the International Crimes Tribunal of Bangladesh. That court, established in 2009, their aim was to provide the detention, prosecution, and punishment for the crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and other crimes under the international law committed in the territory of Bangladesh during their liberation war. The tribunal has the power to try and punish any individual or group, regardless of their nationality. So they will be able to prosecute Pakistani soldiers more easily if they have the support of the Pakistani government. It is a domestic judicial mechanism set up under national legislation, and it is meant to try and internationalize recognized crimes, and that is why it's known as International Crimes Tribunal, even though it is a domestic tribunal. At the moment, the court has delivered a verdict against 137 people over 50 cases. Although, as we all know, the crime of genocide is a very hard one to prove. Therefore, many of the convictions of the tribunal are not of genocide. The presence of the mens rea to destroy the Bengalis as a target group becomes a fairly contested issue in every trial of genocide charge. Proving beyond reasonable doubt the existence of the genocide intent has been a doubting challenge in the ICT prosecution, which has cautioned on limiting the charge of genocide only nearly half of the cases, but will limit the success. Instead, the prosecution preferred charging the crimes under crimes against humanity, and with great success. Since the beginning of the tribunal, the national and international awareness of the Bangladesh genocide has grown. However, not enough for the international community to try to hold the perpetrators responsible. After the end of the war, A lot of war criminals were detained by the Indian army. However, they were given back to Pakistan, causing Bangladesh to lose a lot of opportunity to prosecute these individuals. To this day, Pakistan denied committing genocide in Bangladesh. Yet, what surprised us the most as we did the research is that the UN does not recognize the act committed in Bangladesh as genocide. This shows a disregard for one of the most tragic events in recent history. The recognition by the UN is extremely important for justice, historical memory, and the prevention of future atrocities. The UN plays a key role in the process, as well as appealing for other countries and institutions to do the same. We're all lawyers, so we do not have any majors in politicians, but we did a little research to why maybe the UN wouldn't recognize the genocide. And the Pakistan army was being useful for the West and by the US in the fight against terror in Afghanistan. However, the Pakistani army was playing both sides in this war. They were helping the US. Also, they were providing shelter, training, and weapons for the Taliban, without which the Taliban would have never survived and let alone be able to take over the country after. Yet, a few countries have recognized the genocide in Bangladesh, as so the US, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Italy, England, Russia, India, and a few others. Um, we hope that more people can research this topic. Me and my colleagues, we always try to study genocides that we ourselves don't know much about. We all know a lot about Rwanda, the Holocaust, and Armenia, as we all should. But it's very important to try to study and try to bring awareness for the genocides that are not famous, not very covered by the media, especially not recognized by important countries and institutions. So I'll go here was just to shine a light on the subject so more people can know about what happened in Bangladesh and that in the future, maybe more countries and institutions will be pressured to recognize the crimes committed as genocide. And I think it's so important we're talking about this subject in the International Women's Day. I think it's very meaningful. While the world still waits for the recognition of the genocide in Bangladesh, the Birangonas, the survivors, they continue to demand justice and punish for the war criminals. They remain a symbol of pain and trauma, but also of resistance and courage. I think that's so meaningful that we're talking about this specific genocide today. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. We're very happy and grateful to be here, and we'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to hold off on the questions until after we've heard all three talks. Wonderful, wonderful material to think with. Micaela, would you like to stand at the podium or do your presentation from here, wherever you're the most comfortable?
I think I'm okay here.
Okay,
If
great. Here
everyone
you
can
go.
see me.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Micaela Garrido. I'm an instructor at DePaul University's Justice, Peace, and Conflict Studies program and a research fellow at the Kroc Institute for Peace Studies at Notre Dame. So today I'm here to talk about the Uyghur community and China. So it was touched upon with our keynote yesterday, and I would love to build on what has been shared yesterday as well. So the Uyghur community is one of China's recognized ethnic minorities in what is referred to as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in Northwest China. And the Uyghur lineage and presence existed over many centuries and over various government political control, even after being annexed during the Qing dynasty, eventually became its own independent state, subsequently as a Muslim region, and then in 1949 was reclaimed as territory by China. So it is considered part of that very lucrative silk road economic trail, or you would say trade area that opened up to Europe, Middle East, Asia. So it was located at the crossroads of this ancient Silk Road, where diverse groups from the Middle East, Europe, and Asia converged for trade. And so this area was influenced by Islam for over 1,000 years, with interactions with Muslim merchants. And there was also proof that they had also a diversity of experiences, cultures, religions in that area as well. Until even after its annexation by China in 1949. Notably, in the past 10 years, the community has faced, or even beyond 10 years, but the past 10 years have been so markedly different in terms of the enormous and systemic rise in violence being committed against them. So rather than addressing the root causes of Uyghur discontent or fostering equal dialogue, violent repression is imposed from the top down by the government to address what China refers to as the three evil forces. First, religious extremism, second, separatism, and third, terrorism. So this is where we see justifications for violent repression in the name of nation building, economic progress, or national security. The government issued laws and regulations like the 2017 XUAR regulation on de-extremification, or the Xinjiang implementing measures for the government's counterterrorism law. So for a long while, the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights was receiving requests to conduct investigations in the region. And in 2022, they finally did. They were able to interview some people in the region, conduct qualitative interviews, and eventually issued a report, which I will be largely drawing from in what I'm sharing today. So number one, it found that there is a questionable definition of extremism. So the country's methodologies it used to apply to identify suspects and persons at risk of extremism includes a list of activities or acts that are fundamental to one's freedom of expression or freedom of religion, are not prone to violent acts. So, for instance, these signs and primary expressions in that list include conduct like rejecting or refusing radio and TV, being young and middle-aged men with a big beard, suddenly quitting drinking and smoking and refusing to interact with those who do, or resisting normal cultural and sports activities like football and singing competitions. Eventually, the report also talks about what is referred to as the vocational education training center. So what happens is, with that list of possible extremist activities, individuals are identified who might have been doing those activities or expressing those kind of beliefs, or are related to the individuals who have done so. And these mostly Uyghur individuals would be referred to what is called the vocational educational training centers, or detention, essentially. They were referred to these places without a lawyer, without any knowledge or information about the crime they might have committed or what they have violated, not even knowing how long they will be detained. One interviewee said that, "I was not told what I was there for and for how long I would be there. I was asked to confess to a crime, but I didn't know what I was supposed to confess to." The laws and regulations I mentioned a while ago states that the purpose of these training centers is to educate and rehabilitate people who have been influenced by extremism. But the UN was able to see or gain possession of a spreadsheet that had the information about the Uyghur quote-unquote trainees in those centers, which are essentially their detainees. And that listed reasons for the referral into these centers. The list of reasons also included having too many children, being considered a quote unquote unsafe person, which is really ambiguous. What does unsafe mean? Being born certain years, being an ex-convict, wearing a veil or a beard. And so obviously being referred to these VTCs lack due process, which is a basic right. And so far, at least 1 million people, well over 1 million people have experienced and have been detained, which the Chinese government refuses to acknowledge as a detention center, but have been detained in these VTCs. Now, while in these VTCs, there have been allegations or actually proof through these qualitative interviews of sexual abuse. Almost all the interviewees described being injected with something, being given pills, and both being given regularly, as well as blood samples collected while they were in these facilities. And they shared how it made them feel drowsy. One interviewee said, "We received 1 tablet a day. It looked like aspirin. We were lined up and someone with gloves systematically checked our mouths to make sure we swallowed it." This occurred from the beginning of placement and throughout their time in these VTCs. None of them were told what these were for. None of them felt like they could refuse it. Some former detainees spoke of various forms of sexual violence, including instances of rape affecting mainly women, being forced by guards to perform oral sex in the context of interrogation, and various forms of sexual humiliation, including forced nudity. The accounts described how they would be taken out of the dorms to separate rooms without cameras, where they would where violence would be committed against them in this sexual manner. In addition, several women who described this taking place in a group setting, and they would experience invasive gynecological examinations taking place in a group setting, which made old women ashamed and young girls cry, quote unquote, because they did not understand what was happening. Now, the government firmly denies these claims and even has had press conferences naming and identifying these women witnesses and saying how these are lies. There's also a gendered effect of what is called the homestay becoming family programs. These are presented by the government as promoting social cohesion and community development, where someone from these homestay programs would come visit the homes of in these Uyghur communities for a certain amount of time and really be present as if they are, they're there for definitely more than a couple of days. These have negative implications on the privacy of family life. So, for example, the families couldn't pray or speak their own language when the cadres or the quote unquote relatives were visiting. That is how they were referred to, relatives. This program also had a clear gendered impact. So, for instance, several women who experienced the program spoke of sexual harassment and other forms of intrusive discomfort caused by the visiting, mostly male cadres. One interviewee whose husband was detained at a VTC facility said that they ate with us. I prepared food for them. They were there all the time, even when I was doing homework with my kids. The children had to be educated against their father because they said he had bad ideas, and there was surveillance all day long. Another point is reproductive rights. If we look at official population figures, it indicates a sharp decline in birth rates from 2017 to 2019 and shows that in the space of these 2 years, the birth rate in the region dropped approximately 48.7%, with the Uyghur community majority areas representing the bulk of this decline. And the same applies to the figures regarding sterilizations and intrauterine devices placements in the region, with official data indicating an unusually sharp rise in both forms of procedures in 2017 and 2018 compared to the rest of China. So, for example, in 2018, sterilizations in the regions was at 243 per 100,000 inhabitants, while the overall figure in China was at 32 for 100,000 inhabitants. Plus, the frequency in childbirth is associated with extremism. Like I mentioned a while ago, it was a cause for referral for having too many children, quote unquote, too many children, eliciting punitive responses. Several women interviewed by UN OCHA raised allegations of forced birth control, in particular forced IUD placements and possible forced sterilization with respect to Uyghur and ethnic Kazakh women. Some women spoke of the risk of harsh punishment, including internment or imprisonment for violations of the family planning policy. Some women mentioned that they were forced to have abortions or forced to have IUDs inserted after reaching the permitted number of children under the family planning policy. So these firsthand accounts, the report says, although limited in number, are considered credible. The UN finding is that at the very least, there is a possible crime against humanity here. But if we go back to what was mentioned in the keynote yesterday, what is the definition of genocide? We could very well say that we can see that there is an intent, acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group by causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction or in whole or in part, and imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. Now, in terms of the anti-poverty program, I don't know if I have more time, but in terms of the anti-poverty programs that the government is having in terms of a policy in that area, it essentially equates to forced labor, where individuals are forcibly displaced to work in seafood processing companies, production of tomatoes, cotton factories. The region is a major source of the world's cotton. The region supplies a fifth of the world's cotton. So it's been frustrating in terms of the international level. Nothing has really moved at the ICJ level. At the ICC, there have been civil society groups who have referred the case. The investigator has decided that, the prosecutor has decided that it doesn't have jurisdiction because, China is not a state party to the Rome Statute. And United Nations Security Council referral will never happen with China being a permanent member. What has happened too is that an example is a civil society group called the Uyghur Human Rights Project, UHRP. They submitted an alternative report to the Committee on CEDAW at the UN, which is the committee that oversees nation states' obligation to adhere to the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, and had articulated all these points of concern that I had just mentioned. And so the CEDAW, the government, of course, had its opportunity to rebut or show proof to the contrary, and the CEDAW report does say in so many places in the report that it is concerned about this treatment of women and the treatment of the Uyghur population, including the closure of schools where the linguistic and cultural aspects to the Uyghur community has been removed. So closure of schools where this has happened. Children who have been removed from homes where, because one or both parents are in these VETCs, and moved to government controlled or operated, you would say, orphanages, where they are not being taught their it's pretty much like a VETC, but for a school setting for children. And then lastly, forced labor. The way the US government has responded to this was when in 2019, it had intercepted, the Customs and Border Patrol in New Jersey intercepted a shipment of wigs that, not wigs, but human hair that originated from the region, amounting to like $800,000 worth of hair. And so that propelled the US government to pass the Forced Labor Prevention Act that now ensures or tries to ascertain that it is a clean supply chain. None of the products originate from the area, or the ingredients or elements in the product originate from the area. So we're talking about tomatoes, cotton, solar panels, and chemical or base products used to create, computers or what have you, things that are used to create various technology appliances, I would say. But yeah, so that's where it's at, and I think I will end there.
Okay,
And I've got-
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, good morning to all of us. And I bring you greetings from Ghana. So I want to talk about the resilience and resistance, gendered and LGBTQ narratives of trauma and survivor. I believe when we talk about LGBTQ, a lot of issues come on board. We've had a lot of stories about it. So I did a study 2 years ago to explore how individuals within gendered and LGBTQ communities navigate and respond to trauma. So resilience and resistance among gendered and LGBTQ individuals highlight a complex narrative that warrants our understanding. And when you look at the literature, there exists a gap in understanding the diverse experiences of trauma within gendered and LGBTQ communities, globally, nationally, and locally, and broader social and cultural contexts within which trauma occurs remain unexplored. So when you look into the literature, a lot of studies have been conducted, but in terms of the trauma and experiences that people who are within gendered communities and LGBTQ individuals have not really been explored. So there is a need for us to have an inclusive understanding of gendered and LGBTQ narratives of trauma and survivor. So in conducting this study, I used about 20 individuals or participants from different sexual orientations. Some were transgender, some were gays, some were lesbians, and some too had other sexual orientations. So the findings of the study indicated that most of them were going through all kinds of trauma and adversity through discrimination, violence, and societal stigma. Others too experienced bullying, harassment, and family rejection because of their sexual orientation. So most of them were having feelings of isolation, depression, and self-doubt. So in terms of their survival strategies, most of them were very, very resilient and were very resourceful. Most people sought support from their families and within the LGBTQ communities. And some too were engaging in self-care practices and accessing mental health services because of the trauma that they were going through. And in terms of the resistance to discrimination, there were various forms of articulation, both at the individual level and at the collective levels. There were challenges in terms of social norms and stereotypes through activism. So based on the study that I conducted, the study emphasizes how identity, resilience, and resistance intersect within gendered and LGBTQ communities, and stressing the significance of intersectionality in addressing systemic inequalities, and also centering marginalized voices, which fosters inclusive societies. So the study provides a platform for advocacy, showcasing the resilience of marginalized communities, continued solidarity and action are crucial for creating a future of authenticity and empowerment for all. So based on the study had several implications. One is to centering voices of gendered and LGBTQ individuals, creating inclusive environments, policy reforms, institutional changes, and cultural shifts, and also ensuring that there's an equal rights and opportunities for all individuals, irrespective of your sexual orientation. So this study that I conducted has brought a lot of knowledge to scholarship, and one, it has provided insight into gendered and LGBTQ narratives of trauma and survivor. And it has also enriched our understanding of identity and resilience and resistance dynamics. And it has also, in a way, amplified the voices of marginalized communities as it highlights complexities of trauma and resistance. And again, it has also emphasized the significance of intersectional frameworks and participatory methodologies in research and advocacy efforts. Though the study has a lot of implications for us, the sample size that was used in the study wasn't that much. So the sample size was drawn from participants from various African countries, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and the rest. So, and also the focus was on English. So most of the participants couldn't really express themselves very well. So I had to record their voices, and I had to get someone to help me translate it to them for their understanding. So based on the study, there was a recommendation I made that we need to explore the effect of mental health, well-being, and social integration. I am a clinical psychologist by profession, a licensed psychologist, so I give therapy to people from all diverse of life and from all diverse of issues. So I have patients who identify themselves from various sexual orientations. So there's a need for us to look at mental health issues. And I'm happy this conference is looking at genocide and the trauma people are going through. Yes, it's not easy. People are going through all kinds of depression and anxiety in an attempt to express their sexual orientation. So there is the need for us to examine cultural variations in coping strategies and network support. Yes, so basically the study has brought a lot of information and a lot of knowledge to us in terms of the issues that people who are within gendered communities and LGBTQ individuals go through. Yeah, so on this note, I want to end my presentation, and I want to, this presentation was made possible with support from the University of Ghana Conference Grant Scheme. As I stand here, I was sponsored by the University of Ghana to attend this conference, and I want to use this platform to thank them very, 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 very much. And I'm grateful to the university. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we've got a nice chunk of time to talk about some of the issues that have come up in these presentations. I want to start off with perhaps a few questions, a few themes that I've seen emerge across these papers, and then hopefully open things up so that we can have a conversation in the room and also online. Those of you who are watching online, please send questions in the chat, and we'll be sure to incorporate your questions as well. So, I mean, I see with respect to our presenters from Brazil, a clear case in which the explicit targeting of women with genocidal intent has not received sufficient international attention. And we saw that yesterday as well in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, right? All of the advocacy work that was necessary in order to really get attention to these rape camps that were so central. And so I I hear that there are geopolitical reasons why Pakistan has not been held accountable, and also the gendered nature of the atrocities. So perhaps you could comment a bit more on what kinds of advocacy are underway to address this, and also, you know, how we can bring gender more to the center of the conversation about genocide in international fora.
I think a way we can help bring awareness for the genocide of gender and all the rape camps, rape being used as a weapon of war after the genocide happened, I think must be international accountability. I think important countries, especially UN, should bring more awareness and try to bring the criminals responsible. And I think art can help a lot. With Holocaust, we have seen a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows, and a lot of awareness and media attention, not only art, but journalism as well. So I think with that kind of attention, we can bring more awareness, but we can have more focus and people can know more about what happened in Bangladesh. I think a lot of people have no idea, not only about the genocide in Bangladesh, but how women have been used as a weapon of war.
I also see that Micaela there were some sort of themes in common between your presentation and Micaela's with respect to the way in which there are political problems in bringing this to attention, and that in general, you've got to have cooperation from states in order to address genocide under peacetime conditions, right? And perhaps Evelina can also bring some insight into this. Here we have a relation of forced labor to genocide that's very interesting, right? Because we're seeing the control of reproduction. We're seeing a clear attempt in the case of the Uyghur to reduce a population, but also to instrumentalize that population in order to get certain kinds of work done. Are you seeing a forced labor connection in Pakistan as well?
Well, I'm not sure if forced labor, but I think the connection must be the women have been used by men, especially, but as an object and not as a human being. So maybe that's the connection. And I also see the connection that political issues have been getting in the way of criminal responsibility being brought to the light, especially the UN should do more for China and for Bangladesh women.
Right. What do you think, Michaela?
So definitely this aspect of forced labor is very, it's widespread, pretty obvious in the situation here in China. But again, sadly, the way the government pushes this forward is by saying it's all in the name of economic progress. It's an anti-poverty program. There have been some reports, even as recent as October 2023, that was looking at this really huge problem around fishing, the fishing industry, and connecting that through geocaching, through geo locations of ships going to the region for seafood processing, for where these factories, if looking at the Google Maps, showing how big the VTCs and the factories themselves have just grown by so much, huge proportions, especially during COVID. So really weaponizing, breaking the family, as some of the UN OCHA report mentioned, and then saying all in the name of progress, now they're no longer poor rural women or families that were originally farm workers or tilling a subsistence farm. Now they're making some money in a factory because of the very violent, repressive atmosphere. Of course, you don't really have individuals saying that they don't like it. They are saying that, well, now I can build a home, now I have money for this and that. But if you look at the overall conditions, when you're not allowed to express yourself either individually, culturally, religiously, you are punished for every single act that may be considered extremist. And then you are allowed to work only under these conditions, only for this government-controlled corporation, only to do this, only to earn a certain wage, all dictated by the government, then you certainly have a problematic situation.
Right, so it's quite interesting when we think about instrumentalization of a population in a particular environment, right, to further certain industries, whereas perhaps in the Pakistani context, it seems to be more about sexual exploitation, perhaps trafficking, but of course, that in itself is a form of forced labor.
Yeah, I think we can see it that way as well. And especially in Bangladesh, what happened was a way to exterminate the population, a way to commit genocide, was to use those women as a mean of war, as a rape war. So I think we can clearly see that as a forced labor maybe as well.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, really happy to hear your paper in which we're talking about, you're sort of laying the groundwork for sort of a proto-genocidal context, right? So your paper does not address a genocide per se. Certainly, we're seeing a spread of intense homophobia as a political tool, right, throughout Africa. So I wonder if you could comment on that a bit. If you could comment on how your findings in research in Ghana, right, which is a relatively more tolerant state, how those findings might extend to other parts of West Africa and also beyond. And also, your clients are very lucky. They have you as a therapist.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact that mental health services are direly lacking, not only in Africa, but of course elsewhere as well, but particularly in Africa, where Western style mental health services aren't necessarily embraced. So could you talk a little bit about how people find support when they don't have access to mental health services, and how they cope? And then also how your findings could address this issue of rising homophobia.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. You see that when it comes to mental health issues, there's always some form of stigmatization and some form of discrimination. People wouldn't want to go and see a psychologist or go and see a psychiatrist because of the fact that they think that, in quotes, they are going mad or something wrong is happening to them. So when it happens like that, people would harbor whatever they are going through in life in them. And this is where they can even be suicidal or do things that are very, very bad to themselves. So there's the need for awareness creation and for people to seek help from the appropriate sources whenever they have any mental issues or mental challenges. If you look at my findings, there is a need for us to understand people's experiences, for us to understand what people are going through, and for us not to be very, very judgmental and to criticize others. Yes, and it creates a lot of problem for people. When we talk about mental health, it's more of having a very sound mind, being able to cope with life stresses, being able to move on with your life. So if somebody is being prevented from achieving his or her goals, or there's some kind of rules and regulations governing the person's activities, it adds up to a lot of mental problems for the person, to the extent that it can even affect the person's physical health. So based on my research and my findings, there's a need for inclusivity, for people to be given the voice to express themselves. Because basically, as a psychologist, a lot of people that I've been seeing, especially the youth, are going through all kinds of mental health related issues. Aside depression, others are going through anxieties and the rest, and it affects their career path. Even academically, it affects them. I am also a lecturer as well. So most of the time, before I lecture, whenever I come to the lecture hall, I teach students how to manage stress so that they'll release their stress and their tension. I have videos of how to manage stress, and I can even teach us how to manage stress within a few minutes, how to calm down, how to relax, how to breathe in and how to breathe out so that you can get energy to move on with your life. Yeah, is it?
Shall we do it?
So yeah, I can teach us how to manage stress. So please, okay, so let me do this. So maybe you are going through a lot. You are going through a lot in your life and you want to manage stress. You put your hand here. So you can put your hand here. Yes. Then you put one on your stomach. In fact, this exercise, when you are doing, there shouldn't be any weight on your body. So you see, I'm wearing a watch. So I'll remove my watch. If you're wearing a spectacles, also you can maintain it, but remove your spectacles. If you're wearing a earring, you move everything. So I'll remove everything. But you see, if I remove everything, only God knows where we look first. So I will still maintain my dresses. So you put your hand here and you say that, hey, wow, psychologist, you are blessed. So I'll put my hand here, then one hand here. So you close your eyes. If I say one, you breathe in deeply. You want to release stress. So let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You breathe out. Let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you do like this. You hold your hand very, very tightly like this. If I say 1, you squeeze your hand. 2, you squeeze your hand. 3, you squeeze your hand. 4, 5, then you open it. So let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you raise your hand like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you let your shoulders touch your ears. Yeah, so if your ears are long, it will touch it fast. So let's do it again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, then you see your eyelashes. It must now touch your eyebrow. You want to release stress, so you open your eyes. If what we are doing, it works. It will let you relax. So let's do it. 1, open your eyes. 2, 3, 4, 5. Again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And people who are going through mental problems, sometimes they experience all kinds of symptoms because of their stress. So you might be having pains around your neck. So you want to release the pains there, the muscles there. So we'll do like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes. Now, sometimes when you're managing stress in terms of mental problems, you want to loosen the muscles on your face. So you are coming to squeeze our face. This one, when you laugh, it means that you've opened your eyes. So let's close our eyes. If I say 1, you squeeze your face. You want to release the muscles on your face. So let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, another one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, and the last one is our stomach. Sometimes when you're going through stress or mental problems, you have constipation. There's a lot of tension on your stomach. So you want to release the muscles on your stomach. So we'll do it like this. 1, so it will enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is the exercise that you can do to manage stress when you are going through any form of mental health issues. Thank you.
Are you finding that there is sort of a growing movement in Ghana or in West Africa to help students deal with stress or to expand access to mental health services? Is there a growing tolerance for LGBT for a sort of a diversity of sexual orientations, even as we're seeing greater homophobia at the political level?
Yeah, I think now there's a lot of awareness and a lot of education, especially on stress and mental health issues. Even yesterday, when I came around, I went to the desk here and I realized that we have a counseling services department.
Right.
I wanted to know what happens there, and I was told the psychologist was at a meeting. So now, even in Ghana, every hospital has a mental health unit, and there are psychologists and psychiatrists in every facility. And now there's a lot of education, even in secondary schools, where we have a health center. So when students have any problems, they can go to the health center and those there would give you whatever you need. Yeah.
Okay, questions from the floor? Yes.
Hi, this guy's question is for Micaela. I was listening to what you reported about the ethnic minority in China, and those reasons for detention were so, they were farcical on their face. I'm wondering, you know, like you had three kids, or you were born in the wrong year or whatever. You may not have an answer to this question, but it does make me wonder, who is that ridiculous, who is that story for? Is it for the people who are complicit in imprisoning them, or is it that line, is that line for like the public at large, so they think it's okay? To me, it's just like, say you don't like them, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It makes more sense, or,
Yeah.
or to, you know, not
Yeah.
something like, say they're inferior or something, but like, they had too many kids, they had a beard.
Yeah.
What's that for?
Yeah, so it essentially is really coming down to religious differentiation and persecution. And the Communist Party is essentially who is listing down these, right? What are these indicators of someone possibly being a terrorist or practicing religious extremism? Again, that history of the region and how it wasn't, it was annexed by China. There were prior, it was an independent state for a while with a largely Muslim group. And then now the way China is trying to make sure that they are one nation is to have what we would consider the Han Chinese kind of cultural and setting that is essentially what is dictated by Communist Party of China. So anything that veers away from that might be considered extremist. They justify this by saying, well, in that region, we've experienced suicide bombings, attacks on government buildings, or attacks against police in that area. So we need to have a response. And you could say this is like preemptive strikes because it's a terrorist. There are possible acts or terrorist actors in that area. It's I'd like to go back to, there's this one reading that I assigned my class, Letters from Birmingham Jail, from Martin Luther King, and how he was also, he talks about obnoxious negative peace, that you might have peace because there's no violence, there's no overt violence, but it's obnoxious and it's wrong and it's oppressive, it's repressive. We are seeing that and much more in the region. So, again, when is it justified for a state to say we are doing this in the name of peace and security and nation building? And when is it not? I would say clearly here, we see the kind of narrative that the state is trying to build, and so many other states outside China is saying, no, that's wrong, including the US.
That
right?
seems to be the common theme of this panel, right? All three of these presentations describe a situation in which a population is targeted in order to secure the stability of the state. Right. So we hear this with homophobic discourse in Africa as well. Yes, Camilo.
We have some questions from
Questions,
the
yes, let's hear them.
chat.
All right. Abs Rimmel is asking, what are some things that young adults can do in order to support the victims of gender and sex-based genocidal violence? Additionally, what can young adults do when they see similar topics of control of abortions and increasing anti-LGBT plus legislation here in the US?
Great question. Anyone want to give it a try? Layla, you're on mute, I believe.
Sorry, guys. So my colleague Stephanie, she already replied in the chat, so I would like to read her response. I think if we think about individuals supporting other individuals, the best measures to help are hearing, inclusion, emotional support. I think Jonathan can help us a lot with that. And those measures are great by itself and very effective. But in a national level, to have an actual change in a national level, I think some sort of policy, cultural changes are essential. I would like to add that studying about the topic and art are also very helpful.
Yeah, so from what she said, I believe I agree with whatever she said. There should be support for everyone. We shouldn't discriminate among people. We should show love to everyone. Everyone is special, so we shouldn't discriminate. We should understand everybody's experiences. There's a concept called standpoint. When I was doing my PhD, we looked at feminism, the feminist theory and scholarship. We realized that until you are in something, you would not understand how the thing is, and you might be outside thinking negatively or talking bad against the thing. So there's a need for us to appreciate everybody's experiences and to love everyone. Yeah, thank you.
And I would say it really boils down to our power as voters and our power as advocates. And in the US, essentially, what the Supreme Court has said is that, you know, we're going to keep our hands off of this. This is a state issue. And so how did states like Ohio react? Overwhelmingly, voters said, yes, we want a state legislation for the right to abortion. We have Alabama Supreme Court that said that IVF embryos have juridical personality. They are child, very religious-based perspective. So I think for us, it really depends. Okay, what's today again? It's the International Day for Women. And me, I mean, as a woman, I feel like women are already going through a lot as it is. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. We just want to have control over our own bodies. And so that's my personal perspective. And so how do I vote? I vote according to that. I advocate accordingly in how I feel is right to protect women and their right, whether to have children, whether to not have children, whether to marry or not marry the person they might love or not, or, you know, it might be a man, woman, or, you know, again, the kind of protections that we need to live a full life is, I think, what you can use as your compass to decide how you'd like to support efforts, and whether that be through voting or through advocacy work.
Other questions? Yes. Anna.
Yes.
Yes.
And I was just curious.
You know what, Anna? Why don't you, so that the people, yeah, let's do that. So people can hear you online.
Yeah.
I was just curious, so you were talking about the forced labor camps, the detention centers in the Uyghur community. And we see a lot of companies profiting off of this. Tech companies, car companies, textiles, everything. And it made me think about how currently there's boycotts against Starbucks and McDonald's. McDonald's has not reached their goal for the first time in 4 years because of the boycotts. And Starbucks reported on December 7th that they've seen a decrease in sales by $11 billion because of these boycotts. And while the public is pushing for stopping of aid and all of these things that are supporting Israel in their genocide, is it even feasible to start boycotting to get public awareness for everything that's happening in the Uyghur community, because they have their hands in so many things right now?
Yeah. So some of what has been indicated as specific products of emergent interest is, again, like I mentioned, tomatoes, solar panels, hair, and hair products. And cotton clothes manufactured in the area. I think Shine might be one of those, but I'm whispering because I'm not sure. But the whole idea around awareness, we do have, like, the U.S. Department of Labor issues a report every year of what could be materials or products that are created through child labor. We do have the economic sanctions and in the US, economic sanctions, sometimes freezing of assets, and then again, like the CBP, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. So that's something that can be used to stop Uyghur region products, but also for other things. So essentially, I came into this work through the human trafficking aspect as a practitioner, and, you know, us in the human trafficking field have actually been taught to use this lens of the economic lens to try and cut the reason why human trafficking happens. And that was one way. The CBP does work based off of tips and assistance from really civil society. And that's how they found out about these, some of these shipments. There is a center called the Human Trafficking Legal Center in DC that does these trainings to show, this is one way that we can definitely try and stop these matters. Now, the fishing industry is a huge problem. The layers and layers of subcontracts and how, the flag of convenience with the ships where manpower is owned by one country, the ship by another, all of these. So makes it really confusing, but it's definitely in there as well.
And in general, I think we really need to think about supply chains, right? I mean, something we're not used to in the United States, where we have access to everything we want when we need it, right? But supply chains matter. And the smarter we get about supply chains, the more we can both get smarter about these practices of exploitation, abuse, and murder that are so much under the radar screen. Evelina, could you share with us your thoughts?
Just a very quick comment on boycotting brands. And indeed, there have been already such attempts in the US, in the UK, around the world. We've seen several protests outside of headquarters of big brands as well. So this has been already happening around the world. And for example, if you follow the work of World Uyghur Congress and several other Uyghur organizations, they normally update about those protests so anyone can join. They're quite a lot of fun. But also just very briefly on the legislation in the US, as was already mentioned, it creates a rebuttable presumption that any products coming from Xinjiang are tainted in modern-day slavery. So they cannot be brought to the US, which is a very powerful piece of legislation. So it's not like you have to show that, or somebody has to prove that they're tainted in modern-day slavery. No. You have to show that they are not tainted. So the presumption is there, and you have to, if you want to import them to the US, you have to show that they have not been made by Uyghurs who were enslaved, which is a very important piece of legislation. We tried to do something similar in the UK, but it didn't work. So just wanted to mention that there is already a lot happening in this area. It's not necessarily receiving a lot of international media attention, but if you especially follow the work of certain organizations raising awareness of the situation of Uyghurs, I think then you can join some of those protests and other activities. And then there are also several really good reports identifying all the brands that most likely benefit from Uyghur forced labor. And that includes Nike, that includes Ralph Lauren, that includes Apple and all the brands that we are wearing, that we are using on a daily basis. So it's going to be very, very difficult to resign from them all as well. But then we need to make our choices, and whether we stand up against the horrific treatment of Uyghurs, or we want to be complicit to some extent. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evelina. I wish we could continue, but we've run out of time. We have a short break, and then at 10:40 we will reconvene. That's in 10 minutes for our panel on gender and genocide, in which we're going to talk about the more theoretical issues that are arising from our conversations. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you very much. Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
You know,
Thank you.
very good. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
No, I'm reading a paper right now on forced labor, actually. So it was like, this is like, oh, this is really good. On migrant forced labor, you know, as a result.